Hello everyone. Alright. The Cyberpunk 1.6 update is here, just in time for the launch of Cyberpunk Edgerunners, a show that is far better as an entertainment product than the video game, which itself comments on the large corporation mega hell that is 2077, while itself being a product designed to make money. AAA video games will always muck around in the unescapable irony of saying, corporation bad, while also being cynically designed by one of those same corporations to generate as much revenue as possible. After the disastrous launch of the game, and me power slogging my brain through the glitchy schlock until total atrophy set in around the 150-hour mark, I had no interest in playing the game again. Update after update would roll out, and the little additions and bug fixes were never compelling enough for me to reinstall the game. But now, after playing Update 1.6, all I can say is that I'm mad that I didn't wait nearly 2 more years to play the game, like some of my lucky friends. This is how the game should have been released, and only now is in the game like in a presentable state. For anyone picking up Cyberpunk today, you're going to be met with one of the best looking and sounding games ever devised by humans. A sprawling open world that is the most beautiful of any game yet. All of this wrapped around a pretty tight and fun Far Cry-esque gameplay loop of sneaking, shooting, hacking, stabbing, and slashing. You know, standard FPS RPG hybrid light fare. The problem for me is that my experience with Cyberpunk will be forever tainted by my first playthrough on launch. I remember the night Cyberpunk came out, I installed and played it. Within the opening cutscene alone, I watched 4 men T-pose out of their clothes, putting their glorious penis ones on display for all to see. I truly knew that my experience was going to be, for lack of a better word, fucked. I am envious of all the people that are going to experience Cyberpunk in its current state. It is now polished enough that releasing it in this state would have been met with a solid meh instead of overwhelming outcry. The game is still light on all of those Night City Wire promoted features, which at this point will never come to the game. Still 70% of doors and buildings have nothing to do in them or are inaccessible, and robbing and morality aren't something that really matters. You can't walk into people's apartments and steal. You can't really be a character that you want because your actions aren't backed up by the gameplay. Stealth isn't really a fun option, and the combat and gameplay loop is actually average at best. Cyberpunk has giant multi-layered buildings of which you can visit 2 floors out of 30, one of which being the ground floor. Cyberpunk's world actually suffers from having so many buildings, but never showing where these people live and do business. One of the reasons The Witcher works better with respect to world building for me is because the small spread out populations of the setting were much easier to contend with, showing the mundane, such as their housing and food supplies. In Night City, the disconnect between player character and NPC is very large because the game gives you no opportunity to interact with these people dynamically. NPCs on the street are always walking somewhere, but never coming or going from a building. It would be super weird in real life if you were to turn around and you were to notice that everyone only wanted to walk in a circle around the block. Civilians feel more like props to fill the space than actual people. No amount of updates to glitches will change the fact that this pretty world is 80% empty. Cyberpunk is a beacon of cut content and ambition wrangling that feels fine now, but will never live up to the mystique in trailers. This is officially the last game I was and ever will be excited about, more than in a passing interest. As a whole, video games have too much money behind them and corporate greed. Video game companies need to be growing or they are failing, and with the current market live service and garbage-laden battle pass nightmare games, it's nice that Cyberpunk avoids these trappings. I think CD Projekt Red does open worlds visually extremely well. They are pretty, but in my opinion, a boring slog to traverse. Night City seems like a great place to explore until you actually do. You'll walk down a small back alley or into an interesting looking location or climb up onto something that feels like in another game. You'll be rewarded for going there and exploring. None of that exists in Cyberpunk. There's a whole portion of the map that is these warehouses up to the north. It's huge, and you drive through it once, and it takes like multiple minutes to drive through the straightaway, and there are no quests here. The desert is basically empty as well. It is only the nomads to see out there. And you can tell that the world was awkwardly cut in half somewhere in the dev cycle. The invisible walls outside the desert are just so jarring. Not to mention that nearly half of Pacifica is inaccessible to the player. You essentially have one main road down the middle of Pacifica and its outskirts. The rest sandwiched between it is low texture garbage that you can't walk through and nothing exists in. Or when compared to Cyberpunk, The Witcher's open world works in service of the gameplay, and while there is not nearly as much to see at one time, almost everywhere you see you can at least go and investigate. Smaller populations of the game and the time period lend themselves to better world building. The structure of running around the open world, accepting quests, and slaying monsters makes sense because in-universe, Geralt 1 hates portals, and 2 cannot telepathically check Craigslist.witcher.po for new contracts. In 2077, does it make sense that V has to run straight up to the front door of a gig location for the fixer to magically know that they're right nearby and call them? No, not particularly. The technology should have advanced at least by some point. Night City at more points feels like window dressing for the game rather than a place to call home. There are very few shops you can interact with in the game, and all kinds of vendors and small stands and weird things that are just there to be pretty but don't service gameplay. You'll walk down the street and you'll see all these people who look like they would sell you all of these various food items in the game, you can't interact with any of them. Instead of it being like Yakuza, where if you see a dumpling stand, you can walk up to it, order dumplings, and eat them, it's not even like that's the most important part of the game either. It's just a small detail in a big list of small details that make the game feel less immersive. Cyberpunk's main story is also significantly shorter than the likes of The Witcher 3. While my first playthrough of The Witcher maybe took 100 hours with me diving only a bit into side quests, I'd estimate that the main story is 60 hours of that, so that's pretty sizable. In Cyberpunk, the main story and companion quests attached probably only took 40. You can meet Hanako at Embers extremely quick, to the point where I was utterly fucking shocked when I went onto the elevator and got the point of no return message. Sadly, these are things that will never change. And speaking of things that will never change, what I believe to be the most annoying time skip intro ever in a video game occurs here in Cyberpunk. If there's anywhere Cyberpunk needed to extend the runtime, was the whole year spent with Jackie in a montage. I desperately wanted a few hours of being a low-level criminal, drive-buying other gangs, and stealing product, and shaking people down, because to me, this would be a great contrast to the huge stakes that V finds themselves in very abruptly into the game. You go from entering Night City, or starting as a corpo, or starting as a street kid, to doing your first job, to doing your first job with Jackie after you've been established, to pulling off a mega heist on a billions-of-dollar mega corporation that owns half the planet. Some build-up to the life-threatening stakes would have made the story hit harder, because I don't know anyone who gives a single fuck about Jackie Estacado. He is one-note and boring. Quoting Hemingway like he's a second-year English major. He wants to be a legend. Blah, 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 blah. I don't care because they've literally used him only as a plot device to drive the story forward. His death does not feel earned, nor did I have any real emotional response to him because I barely know this person. The funeral quest, the game also tries to make you feel even more somber about a character that has less screen time as your best friend than Badger does across all of Breaking Bad. He is supposed to be the main driving device of the plot moving forward. His death directly leads V to putting the biochip in their head, but because of his limited runtime, is reduced to nothing more than an ancillary character in a game full of flashy characters with little substance. The pacing of this story is infuriating to me. There's so many fewer major characters in the game compared to Witcher 3, and all of them have less to latch onto to boot. Triss, Yennefer, Vesemir, Lambert, Eskel, Vernon Roche, Lethal, Dijkstra, Philippa, Kira, the Baron. All of these characters beat the stuffing out of every one of Cyberpunk's characters in terms of personality and acting, More than anything, it feels like V is the only one who can do anything in the world, as none of your major companions, save for Pan Am in the tank mission, are ever competently shown to have their own influence on events. Jackie dies, Judy never really shows up in combat, River is annoying, Carrie is a gold-plated sissy man. And speaking of acting, Keanu Reeves is essentially playing himself in this game, which is fine, but it's always distracting to have Keanu pop up in my face. I would have much rather if they used the tabletop interpretation of Johnny Silverhand, modeled him correctly, hired a game voice actor, an industry vet, and saved several millions of dollars, and put it into working out how to put the fucking Mantis Blade climbing in the final game. Another strike against Cyberpunk's level design is that for a game with so many tall buildings, the amount of tall buildings you will ever walk into or high places you fight in is staggeringly low. There's not enough use of vertical space in the game, and it doesn't make sense that missions only take place for the most part in 1 or 2 story buildings, sometimes with a basement. Where is the Judge Dredd mega slum apartment that is full of criminals that I have to go get my money back from some scumbag in? Where is all the world building? It looks like a city when you're zipping by on a motorcycle at 100 miles per hour, but if you stop and start poking around, you realize there are no real secrets, and there is no real reason to explore. So many times during this game, you'll walk down an alley, or climb over something, or go somewhere you'd expect to be able to be rewarded for your curiosity, and you would if Cyberpunk maybe had more time in the oven. But unfortunately, there is no incentive to go anywhere that doesn't have a mission marker. Yeah, and that's about it. I didn't want to make this too long of a video, but I hope you enjoyed my take on the new Cyberpunk update, as well as what I think of the game as a whole now that it's updated. For reference, it's still meh if that wasn't clear enough in the video. And yeah, if you like this video, I hope you would subscribe and like and maybe even comment, hit the bell, you know, the funny YouTuber things. And yeah, keep following my channel for more videos, not necessarily on Cyberpunk. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.